Why aren't visual novels considered real games? So recently, I had finished playing through the title AI The Somnium Files: The Nirvana Initiative and absolutely enjoyed every aspect about the game. But a persistent thought in the back of my mind kept coming up whilst playing, and that was just why are visual novel games rarely if ever brought up in conversations about gaming as a whole, and why are they frequently mocked in general discussions? Which is what led me into wanting to make this video to begin with, going over and discussing the problem with this mindset against visual novels and where it even came from in the first place. But before going any further into this video, I'd first like to ask something. When thinking of notable visual novel titles, what games actually come to mind? Most mainstream examples that are out there seem to be past their initial burst of popularity. Examples of this that come to mind are the Ace Attorney and Danganronpa series of games. There hasn't really been any releases recently in this genre that has garnered that same level of mainstream appeal like those titles did. Historically in the West, they've always been a hard sell for people outside of the niche. My own appreciation and enjoyment for these types of games, like a lot of fans, goes all the way back to the original Ace Attorney trilogy. The animations, murder mystery angle, and unique approach to having dynamic uses of music is still impressive and entertaining all these years later. Over the years since then, I've played through a decent number of visual novel games and gotten a better understanding of why they can be amazing. But despite my love and appreciation for the genre, whenever I look online or at Steam user reviews, people always point out as if it's universally agreed on that whenever a video game's genre is a visual novel that it's a bad thing, as if it's a derogatory term. My breaking point for this mindset, and probably the best case study for this happening on a wider scale, was last year with what I would say was Nintendo's best game of 2024 with Emio the Smiling Man. Before the game was announced to be a sequel to the long dormant Famicom Detective Club series, originally all we saw was a short tease titled Who is Emio? This campaign quickly became mainstream and managed to amass over 1 million viewers on social media. For a small while, people were speculating just what this game could be. Further engaging excitement was the fact that this was going to be a mature horror game, which was something Nintendo isn't exactly known for. The initial design of the main antagonist, Emio, was so impactful that it got people talking. Looking back, this marketing stunt was a genius way to get people aware of this title. Anyway, later on through social media, it was revealed to be a new installment in the Famicom Detective Club series. And at this moment, once people noticed it was a visual novel, they started to turn against the game or just become uninterested. Which to me is confusing. Why does this game being a visual novel suddenly make it any less interesting? We'll be looking more into this viewpoint of why there is so much dislike from general gaming audiences a little later on in this video. But historically speaking, visual novel games are some of the oldest video games out there, at least in Japan back when localization wasn't exactly widespread. Over in the West, and as a result of this, gaming audiences didn't exactly grow up alongside and get to know titles like the Famicom Detective Club series. This is since they only made their way over here back in 2019 with their remakes on the Switch. But still, these kinds of titles predate most genres, with them taking off in the West around the DS generation with the previously mentioned Ace Attorney series alongside a bunch of other murder mystery detective games. People have a hard time getting into these kinds of games and typically associate the genre as having a lack of stimulation, which is why they don't consider them games in the first place. They see them more as just glorified books, with the only input ever being the A button. We've all seen those memes before online. In all honesty, however, when looking at things objectively, this genre has come a long way since the NES in Japan and even the DS era in the West, despite what people might say. Saying these games haven't evolved at all over this course of time is simply just misinformation. Like many long-running genres, it's become much more mechanically complex with the transition into 3D, which allows for different styles of visual novel games when it comes to more standard and interactive experiences. Modern visual novels are so polished nowadays that some even have fully voice-acted dubbing, so even if the aspect of reading is unattractive, there is practically no excuse at this point when it comes to trying these kinds of games. Now that we've taken a look at reasons for this genre being just as important as any other, let's take a step back for a moment and explore the other side of things with common criticisms that people typically comment on as to why they dislike visual novels to begin with. I can understand that for some people, the idea of a slow burn with the main gameplay loop being reading isn't exactly attractive, but as previously mentioned, there are games out there that are fully voice acted now. If pacing and length is an issue, then Slay the Princess is the perfect short and sweet experience, and its story goes in all sorts of directions, with it also having a great amount of replay value. Since we're on the topic of issues with visual novels, there is one fundamental flaw I find with this genre that results in it struggling to reach mainstream appeal. It's a bit strange for me to go against the very topic that I'm defending, but please hear me out for a moment. The biggest problem I find from the perspective of someone who really enjoys this genre that hurts the growth of visual novels is just how easy they are to spoil. Think about it, even outside the niche examples, titles like Danganronpa with its easy to spoil death premise, or most visual novels relying on murder mystery plots which is very easy to spoil. Not to mention the biggest example of this spoiler issue being Doki Doki Literature Club. Personally, I've never been interested in this game, but even despite that, everyone out there knows the twist of this title. So there really is an argument to be made here on what's even the point of playing these games to begin with when you already know how it plays out. I feel like this results in fans of this genre wanting to be less vocal about them since it could result in spoilers. And most people online don't exactly mind spouting a bunch of spoilers if it results in clicks and engagement. Which, let's be honest, it does. There are no shortage of examples out there of this happening, which to me is somewhat frustrating. Anyway, what I'm trying to say with this point is that when it comes to discussions on visual novels, things can be very tough. I can't exactly go in depth about any of these titles without spoiling them. Unfortunately, with the information age of social media, casual fans who might be into these kinds of games are likely to spoil themselves, which could prevent them from ever trying these titles to begin with. The topic of spoilers is an interesting one, since for me personally, it can easily destroy any motivation I have to play a video game as someone who heavily values this aspect of gaming in the first place. There are some visual novels out there that get around this issue by telling their story in such a way or having enough replay value and varying routes to where they can't be easily spoiled. With that being said, it's still quite rare for this genre to not be easily ruined simply by word of mouth because of their easy to spoil nature most of the time. Another problem I find visual novels run into is that they aren't exactly easy to advertise. Outside of the Genius Who is Emio campaign, whenever these titles are shown in something like a Nintendo Direct, they tend to always be overshadowed. Even whilst editing this video, it's quite difficult to communicate the excitement of these games when out of context it looks like this. I definitely feel for the companies that have to advertise these kinds of games, since doing it in a way that doesn't show spoilers while still being exciting isn't exactly easy to do. Also, a continuing issue I see brought up that alienates these games from mainstream success can be their accessibility. Despite my love for this genre, I'll very much admit that I have the reading speed of a goldfish and it isn't something unique to me. But despite this fact, this point isn't exactly a strong one when you consider how books are still popular alongside ebooks. So I'm not really sure why when it comes to gaming, with its added level of immersion with its interactive use of storytelling, and it becomes less attractive. This is probably the most widely expressed point that I see against visual novels online. It's people saying how they aren't actual video games and are just books. Then again, you can't exactly say that statement without bringing up the subject of what even is a video game to begin with. Without losing the topic of this video, the DNA of visual novels can be seen in many other gaming genres out there, most notably being JRPGs. Even down to the presentation of these games, and in particular when the characters are talking with one another, there is definitely an argument to be made that these are just visual novel sections. Despite that fact, you don't see people online arguing how JRPGs aren't video games. Is something like Death Stranding any less of a game because it starts with a lengthy opening cutscene that requires no input from the player? At least in visual novels, player input is required to progress what's happening on screen, which if you ask me is what I will consider is required for a video game to be a video game. This point has always been the weakest from others when it comes to criticising this genre. With visual novels, sure, you're mostly reading, but you also get all the added benefits of being a video game on top of that. The use of dynamic music and animated visuals like in Ace Attorney further enhance what's going on, alongside the fact that actions by the player's input can determine the outcome of the story and objective, which are fairly much a staple of this genre. Translating all this into a simple book or novel will be impossible, since even outside of the player input that's required, there is still the use of visuals, especially music, that elevates these kinds of experiences from traditional novels and literature. Not to mention that a lot of these games have branching paths and optional ways to interact with the game's world. Also, if you're familiar with any kind of visual novel game, you'll know just how incredible their soundtracks can be. This is since the developers knew that you'd be listening to it for so long, so it just had to be good. If you want to be more blunt and further argue what makes a video game, then you could point out the fact that you can still lose in a visual novel. This is since there is still a level of skill by using logic to solve puzzles and make decisions being used here. So now that we've looked at frequent criticisms associated with the genre, I feel like in some ways visual novels just seem to have an unfortunate reputation when it comes to the mainstream gaming sphere. Despite being around for nearly just as long as gaming began in Japan, it's still relatively niche over in the West. I feel like this genre needs its equivalent to what Persona 5 and Final Fantasy 7 did for JRPGs when it started to catch on more with Western audiences. Despite most well-known examples like the Ace Attorney and Danganronpa series being way past their prime, thankfully it seems like indie games are pushing this genre more into the mainstream light. There's also an argument to be made here that maybe there is no place for visual novels when it comes to them being widely accepted among the masses, since in some ways they are simply too out there and different to have broad appeal. They can become so much more when it comes to their popularity, but I feel like this strange reputation it's garnered in the West over the years has to change before it can reach that level of success. My goal with this video is to hopefully spread the good name of visual novel games, since I rarely see them brought up in general gaming discussions despite how great they are. Also, whilst we're at it, I'd like to throw some quick recommendations out there for anyone that might be curious of where to start when it comes to this genre. So here's my short and sweet recommendations for newcomers looking to dive into these kinds of games. Ghost Trick is a cult classic visual novel with a nice stylized comic book aesthetic to boot. The main premise of possessing different objects to solve puzzles and move around this game's world is a very unique one. This is an easy recommendation for anyone looking for a great story with fun characters and animations, and is available on pretty much anything. If you like Danganronpa and still haven't played Raincoat, this is also a solid visual novel. A lot of the game is voice acted and has that same out there tone that the director is known for, alongside plenty of unpredictable plot twists. My final recommendation is the series that made me want to talk about visual novels and just how far they've come over the last few years. That being the AI The Somnium File games. Like all visual novels, it's best to go in blind with this one. This entire game is voice acted and is definitely the funniest title I've played in a while. It's similar to Psychonauts with how the main premise is entering the minds of people involved in the case, which can make for some very out there settings and creative ideas. With all that being said, at the end of the day, niches exist for a reason, and maybe it's best that visual novels stay within their passionate following. However, I do think at the same time they have the potential for mass appeal despite the unnecessary hate thrown towards these games. They're just as good as the best of releases if you can get over this mindset. But with all that being said, what do you think of visual novels as a whole? Do you have any recommendations? Feel free to let me know in the comment section. Also, any feedback on this video will be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.
The latest entry in the The Somnium Files series is stirring.
Wait a second, it's pronounced The Somnium Files? I've been saying it wrong this entire time.